It's so good to be back. I had a couple days off, but it's summer, so I might have a few days off. And I'm really glad you stuck around. Do you know how in summer we think that everything gets slower and that business slows down? And we sometimes think that in TV as well. And that is not the case tonight. And it is not the case today. Because if you were in the Oklahoma Panhandle today, you may have had the urge to go to a courtroom because it was busy in one of them courtrooms. In fact, it was so bizarre. I'm not sure I've seen a courtroom like this before. 5 defendants and all their lawyers had to jam into one courtroom. And they had to share the space, not only with each other and each other's attorneys, but also the victims' family members. They are alleged to have conspired to murder. Not just murder, but really brutally, viciously, sadistically murder. So I know by now you probably recognize that's Grandma Tiffany up there, right? That one at the top. She's allegedly maybe the linchpin to all of this. That guy on the right up there, that's the boyfriend. That's boyfriend Tad. And then the other 3 are the Twombleys and then Paul Grice way over there on the right, on the bottom. These 5 are God's misfits, self-proclaimed God's misfits. And they are in a world of hurt right now. They better hope to God that God loves them, because right now they could be facing the death penalty for the allegation that they murdered Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly, all over a custody dispute. Grandma Tiffany didn't like Veronica because those are her grandchildren. She wanted them to be with her son, not with Veronica. I am going to talk to you about that bizarre courtroom today. And I just got this to say. There were card tables. They had to use the jury box with card tables and lawyers and defendants in the jury box. So you're going to get the inside scoop from Brian Enton, who was in there, and what it was all about, what it was like. The other thing that we have is this crazy story out of Florida. I am not against plastic surgery. I am not against needles or liposuction or any of that stuff. I think if you want to go for it, that's your business. That's your temple. You can keep your temple looking swell. Thing is, though, is if your husband is the surgeon, that's an awkward conversation if things aren't going well. And it turns out there was a surgery that didn't go so well in Florida. And the wife ended up dead. Now the husband is being charged with murder. So this is weird. I'm going to dig into this one, but it wasn't just kind of like the story of, oh, well, something went wrong and now he's been overcharged. It turns out that lots of things had been going wrong for a long time in that clinic. Like unlicensed staff performing procedures, filth and disgust throughout it is a crazy story. I'm going to tell you all about it. There's also some staff members who are spilling the beans about what was going on in there. So that's coming up as well. And then I have this story for you, and I know you've already heard it, but you haven't heard this part. Justin Timberlake is doing work on the East Coast, and so is his beautiful wife, Jessica Biel. So they're in New York. And if you know summer in New York, it stinks in New York City. And most of the super rich and famous and fancy people go out to the Hamptons. And so Justin Timberlake was out in the Hamptons, and the police pulled him over. Said he was glassy-eyed and slurring and couldn't do the field sobriety test. And boom, he got charged with, there's that picture. That tells a lot. But got charged with DUI. Here's my question. Is he being treated equally? Now, I'm going to blow your mind here. Is equal treatment of a celebrity actually unequal because of how much extra it costs them? I'm going to go into all that. Also going to find out if that little Hamptons community that is teeming with rich, famous celebrity people has a lot of that, and if they get the celebrity discount. Anyway, if you have ever planned a wedding, you probably still have flashbacks of working on the seating plan. Uncle what's-his-name can't sit next to cousin so-and-so, and do not put grandma near the band. The judgy vegans all sit together. This is not a skill that they teach in any law school, but it might actually pay off if they did. Because it came up today in a small-ish courtroom in Oklahoma, where 5 defendants plus all of their lawyers had to cram into that courtroom for a very important pretrial hearing. I got a map for you because when I read it, I was confused. So we thought we should probably put a map together because this group, they may well have gone to some of the same weddings back when they were all friends and neighbors and members of an anti-government fringe group known as the God's Misfits. Their names, as I am sure you well know by now, are Tiffany Adams, a.k.a. Grandma Tiffany, her boyfriend Tad Cullum, their friends Cole and Cora Twombly, and another misfit named Paul Grice. All five are accused of planning and carrying out the vicious, violent, sadistic, and bloody murders of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly that happened back in March. I'm sure you also remember that Grandma Tiffany was in a bitter custody fight with Veronica Butler over the children that Veronica had with Tiffany's son. Police say that Tiffany lured Veronica and Jillian to the Oklahoma Panhandle from Kansas on the pretext of handing over the kids for a birthday party. But instead of the handover, police say Tiffany and the other four misfits killed the women and then buried their bodies 10 feet down the day before Easter. Tiffany and Tad and the Twombleys, they were all arrested 2 weeks later. Paul Grice, though, that took a little longer. He wasn't arrested until May, at which time, according to the affidavits, he admitted to the whole damn thing, which is a problem for his co-defendants. And one of the reasons that today's hearing was so important, not to mention awkward. NewsNation senior national correspondent Brian Enton was jammed into that courtroom too, and he joins me now live. I was dying to talk to you about everything, not just the map that we put up, but the weirdness of having so many of them in one small courtroom and what it was like to be in there with them. So take me there and tell me everything.
Yeah, I think awkward is a good word to describe it, Ashleigh. First of all, we've seen over and over again the way they bring them into the courtroom. You know, they've got them shackled, the bulletproof vest. They walk them in one by one through the parking lot. And then once they got in the courtroom, there's the video right there. There's Grandma Tiffany when they brought her in this morning. I asked her a question, by the way, and she would barely even look at me. She just walked straight ahead. Anyway, once they get into the courtroom, in the past, they brought them in one by one for their part of the hearing. But today, as you mentioned, they had them all together. And it was a bizarre setup because they had to cram a lot of people in there. You saw the map. They had to put up in the jury box, it was Tad Cullum and Cole Twombly. And they had two white card tables that they put up in the jury box. They separated them. So you had the suspects at the table and then each had their lawyer at the table. And it was a little awkward because when they had to walk up and down those stairs up into the jury box, you know, they're shackled. They could barely get up the stairs. So they were up in the jury box. In front of the jury box, you had Paul Grice. They had another table set up right there. And Paul Grice was sitting there with his attorney. On the other side of the courtroom, on the other side of the judge, was Cora Twombly. Then at the defendant's table, at the big defendant's table that's always there, that's permanent, you had Grandma Tiffany, which I found to be kind of interesting because, you know, investigators have said all along she's the mastermind behind the whole thing. She got the main table sitting right there at the big defendant's table. Then, of course, you had the prosecutors, and it was full. There were at least four defense investigators sitting right in the front row, and then, as you mentioned, also victims' family members. So it was full. It was awkward with them all together. You can only imagine, Ashleigh, they likely haven't seen each other or locked eyes since they were all arrested.
So I was doing a little reading up on your notes while you were in there, and something just jumped out at me. It was the Twombleys, right? They're not together. They're actually apart, facing each other across the courtroom. And like Mr. Twombly's lawyer is a woman and seemed to be like way more friendly than you would normally see in a courtroom. And that's Cora looking across at her husband.
Yeah.
What happened? What was going on?
Yeah, this was strange. So first of all, you mentioned they're across from each other. They locked eyes. At one point, it looked like Cora maybe was almost crying a little bit. But Cole Twombly has this female attorney. And at one point, he now has kind of a buzz-shaved head, and she's like rubbing his head, Ashleigh. She's rubbing Cole's head. This is the attorney. rubbing his head in the courtroom, and almost like leans over and is leaning on him, which everybody in the courtroom noticed. And the thing I was wondering is, I mean, you've seen this sometimes during a trial, attorneys will sort of try to humanize their clients. They might touch them a little bit, try to show that they're not monsters. But this wasn't a trial. I mean, there's no jury there. And I was just wondering what Cora Twombly was thinking while this whole thing was going down.
Well, and I'm also thinking, what was that lawyer thinking? Because you should not be, sampling the buzz cut of your client and then, relaxing teenage movie theater style with your arm around the back of your client's chair, especially since the dynamic is that his wife is right across the way. What was that like? Was she upset? Was she crying? Did she eventually look away? How did that go over?
I mean, honestly, our eyes were so locked on what was happening with the lawyer, I actually didn't look over at Cora at that moment. But throughout the entire thing, Cora just seemed to be actually the most emotional. She was teary-eyed. She looked like she was emotional. The others, not so much, really didn't show much emotion at all. Grandma Tiffany, you remember last time we saw her, she had that really tight braid. That was the thing I remember about the last time I saw her walking in. She didn't have the braid this time. It was only partially braided. Her hair has turned much more gray. And she, again, there she is when she walked in. I mean, she doesn't look at anybody, really. Barely makes eye contact with anybody. She's a serious woman, it seems. And she marched right in that courtroom and didn't really say a word.
Well, she didn't say a word, but you talked to some court watchers. I mean, listen, there's a big fascination, not just in that little town and that little panhandle, but all across the country. Some people who were in court came out of court to talk to you. Tell me what you found out.
Yeah, I think the fascination and the big question right now, especially with them all crammed in that little room together, is who is going to turn on who? And that's what happens behind the scenes at this stage of an investigation. And the prosecution oftentimes hopes for it, that someone's going to turn on somebody else and they're going to get some info. And who's going to try to save themselves? And that's what a lot of people in the courtroom were thinking about today. Take a listen. Do you get the sense that they're going to turn on each other at some point?
It makes you wonder if somebody won't start talking. It'll be interesting to see who, because I think somebody will talk.
Who do you think?
If I was picking, Cora, maybe, or Paul, one of those two. Tad is very in tune and he likes watching what everybody's doing, because he had eye contact with everybody. He was watching the whole thing, between the lawyers and everything. So it was interesting.
It's interesting she said that about Cora. Again, she did appear to be sort of the most emotional in the moment today in court, Ash.
Well, if I'm Cora and I'm looking at my husband doing, footsie and fingersies across the courtroom, I might consider flipping on him. Who knows? That might not be the best, strategy I've ever heard of in a courtroom. Brian Enton, thank you so much for that. I just love when you give us this color, and especially in this bizarre case. So thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, I now want to bring in Kathleen Canning Mello. She is a retired FBI profiler who spent over 30 years with the FBI. Kathleen, this is great having you here, because I keep thinking of the dynamic, not just in that courtroom, but in the investigation and how the investigators came at this in order to get 5 people charged in a conspiracy. And now that you have 5 people charged in a conspiracy, those 2 women said it's going to be Cora. She'll flip. Do you have any thoughts in the dynamics of this crime as to what's going to happen, what's been happening behind the scenes?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Ashleigh. And I just found that video and your statements about what happened in court today fascinating, especially with the defense attorney. So my take on that was knowing that Cora looked to be the weakest, right? And they all want to put up this strong front, right? This is a united team here. And Cora may be breaking. So this is just my supposition, that may have been a subtle message by the defense attorney to buck up. You need to strengthen up. up and not be so emotional and sort of get her angry by touching her husband, in a way that was inappropriate, and try to get her to kind of buck up and be strong. That's my kind of take on it. But certainly, and this is what is fascinating in such a terrible crime, that they were able to get 5 people to agree to this heinous act, this murder of these 2 women, and to try to keep it quiet. It's hard to keep 2 people quiet, and having 5 people who are involved in this crime to the degree that they were, and then try to keep it quiet. It's next to impossible. And we already know that Paul Grice has made a statement, and perhaps Tiffany has as well. But Cora, as a mother, I think she probably has the most to lose, right? And I just want to speak to her daughter, because the affidavit tells us that after Cora came home, she disclosed what happened, right? She said, we have killed these women. And I really give a lot of credit to this young woman, because she had the moral thought to say, well, how are we reconciling this? Certainly, Veronica, you've, I guess, reconciled or rationalized that she's an unfit mother, but why did you have to kill Jillian? Like, what does she have to do with this? And then Cora goes the next step and tells her daughter that she needs to go clean the truck out, which the child knew at that point was involved in this homicide. So what she's done is made her daughter an accessory after the fact. So this is, to me, where the hypocrisy lies, right? These people are promoting themselves as heroes to these children, as saviors to these children, and she has now burdened her daughter with the knowledge that this group and her parents have now committed this heinous act and could potentially be put to death or certainly serve life in prison. So she's got this now trauma that she has to live with. And she, in her own 16-year-old mind, is thinking, I'm involved in this thing now. They've made me go clean out this truck where there perhaps was blood in this truck.
That is interesting, but I also think that, so the poor kid, right? Because now she kind of knows, oh, dear God, what have I done? I've turned my mom in, and look what it was bigger than I thought. I'm 15, Sure. But I also think that as an investigator, couldn't you also say, this is sort of how I'm guessing your mind would work. You could go to Cora and pull her aside and say, hey, guess what? We're going to charge your daughter now. So what else do you want to do for us so that we don't charge your daughter? Yeah, is that happening? Do you assume that is a tactic?
As an investigator, that would be a tactic that I would use for sure, because this is your daughter now who is now involved in this conspiracy. You've drawn her into this conspiracy. You're responsible for what happens to her next. Do you want to see her go to jail for something that you've done, you who purport yourself to be a savior of children?
Yeah.
So I can see why she was the one that was
because listen, Tiffany's son has an alibi. He was in a rehab. He was jailed. He was in rehab, and he wasn't there for any of this. But that doesn't mean you can't be a part of something. You can't be part of planning something. And I wonder if there's still, look, we got 5, and that's a lot. But do you think there's a possibility we may end up with more, or do you think the charging's done now that we're at preliminaries?
I think it's hard to say, and this is another fascinating aspect of this, that they said so many incriminating things to other people who weren't directly involved in the homicide, right? You have Beasley, who had the property, and Callum goes to him and says, hey, they're looking at me for the disappearance of these women. I used the skid steer on your property. Make sure you tell them that I was just doing dirt work for you. And then there's another gentleman where Grice goes to him and says, hey, how do I get to Mexico? And what is about the resiliency of DNA testing, right? So they're making these incriminating statements to other people. And certainly Wrangler Rickman, the father, he does have an alibi. However, the information in the affidavit disclosed that he had heard conversations from Tiffany about getting rid of Veronica. So he was at least aware before the crime happened that this was the intention moving forward.
Yeah, well, it is such a fascinating story. I just want to be Brian Enton right now in that courtroom, because I wouldn't know who to look at first, second, or longer. I wouldn't know who to gaze at, and I do love doing that. Kathleen Canning-Mello, great to have you on. Thank you so much. We'll have you back.
Thank you so much.
All right, coming up in just a moment, a 15-year-old boy with autism goes missing from his own bedroom in the middle of the night. Almost 4 months later, he is still missing, and police have zero leads that they're telling us. So why did his mom and his stepdad pack up and leave the house? Actually leave town altogether. I'm going to unpack all of that with the boy's father. He is live with me next. If your child went missing from your family's home in the middle of the night, you'd go to the ends of the earth to find them, right? I know I would. But would you move away? Would you just pack up your stuff and relocate hundreds of miles away? I know, it's weird. I have to ask because it's one of the super duper strange turns that surrounds the mysterious disappearance of that boy on your screen, Sebastian Rogers. He is a 15-year-old autistic boy. He vanished from his own home almost 4 months ago in Hendersonville, Tennessee. That's near Nashville. It happened on the night of February 25th. Sebastian was supposed to be asleep in his room, right? Sleep in his bed. It's late. It's 10:30 at night, right? His mom, Katie Proudfoot, says she hears a loud thud sometime around 10 p.m. and she yells up at him to quieten down, go to bed. But the next day, she says he was gone. That's the story that she tells. And since then, police and volunteers have searched more than 2,000 square miles. And despite aerial searches by helicopters and drones and nothing. Look at all these people out there. They've been at it. But there's no sign of Sebastian. And here's what's also weird. A month after he vanished, his mom and his stepdad, they just packed up. And they moved to Memphis on the other end of the state. Your kid goes missing from upstairs. I don't know. I have not been in those shoes, but I kind of feel like I would stay in that house in case he came home. Mom said it was because of stepdad's work that they had to move. And then a month after they moved, that mom told Nancy Grace that she planned to go back, but didn't know when. For their part, the authorities say there's no evidence of foul play, but no real leads either. I'm joined now by Sebastian's father, Seth Rogers, and his spokesperson, Tony Mathis. Thank you to the both of you. And Seth, I'm really so sorry that, here we are having this conversation with NewsNation again about your son, Sebastian, and it's been all these months. Do you have any updates? Have you heard anything, any leads, anything at all from the police?
No, ma'am. I haven't. Every lead that I do come across, I have my private investigators searching into it.
And have they come up with anything? Have they been helpful?
We've had pictures and stuff come in. My private investigators track it down. And then we find out that it's just another rabbit hole. Sumner County, I give them all the tips that I get. Just not really. And
so when you give them the tips that you come up with your private investigators, are they thankful? Do they indicate to you that this is helpful? Do you have a good relationship with the police? Do you feel like they're on your side, that they're working hard?
That's what they're conveying to me. But
I can't imagine how hard this must be.
I'm not seeing my son's not here. This is my first Father's Day. What made me a father is not here.
I'm so sorry. I am just so sorry. If there's, anything we can do, we'll keep the story, in the news. What's so bizarre is that Katie and Chris packed up and left that home. Are you in contact with them at all? I know originally they weren't talking to you at all. They weren't sharing information, which also seemed bizarre to me. Even if a split up is acrimonious, you still have this shared goal, right? To find your boy. Has it gotten any better between you and Katie in terms of sharing info?
It doesn't feel like a shared goal. It sure doesn't feel like a shared goal.
Wow.
It feels like it's only my goal. in all of Sebastian's army. It's their goal. It's my goal to find Sebastian. But as for contact between me and the Proudfoots, there has been no contact.
Still nothing.
It's like I'm the only one that misses my son.
You know, let me ask you, Tony, if you can jump in here. I know that you and Seth asked for the FBI to engage, take over, become a part of the case. Where has that gone, if anywhere?
Well, as you well know, Ashleigh, it's only going to go somewhere if the Sumner County asks for them to take the case over. And kind of where we're at and where I've been all along is I just want them to answer one simple question for Seth, and I feel like that he deserves an answer to this question. Are they closer today than they were February 26th? And if the answer to that is no, or we can't get an answer, then I think it's only logical that the case be elevated.
Yeah, it seems, I mean, what are we? I think 114 days. I understand that investigators can't always share everything, but do you feel, Tony, that at least they have been, I don't know, optimistic or helpful or hopeful, or at least been keeping Seth up to speed on what they're doing?
I think that we feel like that the communication could always be better. And, you know, let's put you or I as a parent in Seth's shoes. If they can't give you an answer to the question, are you any further along today than you were 114 days ago? I mean, as a parent, are you not terrified to hear that?
I can't imagine it. Seth, if Sebastian can hear you, if he's out there, what's your message for him?
Same as it's always been. I need you to get away from whoever you're near. Get to a phone. My phone is still on, son. The same phone number. Everything. I need you to call me. I need you to call 911. I need you to tell who you are. That you need to tell them that you are wanted. I need you home. I need to know you're safe. I need you, buddy. You've always been my buddy, and you will always be my brother.
Stay strong, Seth. We got your back here. We're going to keep the story on the air. Somebody knows something, and there's going to be a lead that turns up. In the meantime, we do want people to know, Seth Rogers and Tony Mathis, thank you for this. We do want people to know that if you have any information on the whereabouts of Sebastian Rogers, please call the Sumner County Sheriffs at 615-451-3838. Again, take a picture of your screen. I always say it's 615-451-3838. The Sumner County Sheriff's Office. And we're going to keep our eye on that story. In the meantime, just ahead, a plastic surgeon in Florida is charged with killing one of his patients who just happened to be his wife. And while that may be the worst mistake to ever happen in that office, it is allegedly not the first or the strangest thing to happen in that office. Stories next. So there is really no surgery out there that is risk-free, and we all know that, right? When we lie down on the operating table, we really have to put our trust in that doctor. Hillary Brown had more reasons than most of us to trust her doctor, her plastic surgeon, who had planned to do several relatively minor procedures all in one go back in November. And the reason that Hillary was so trusting was that her surgeon was also her husband, Dr. Benjamin Jacob Brown. But maybe Hillary shouldn't have been so trusting, because Dr. Benjamin Brown is now being charged with second-degree felony homicide and manslaughter by culpable negligence after Hillary died from complications on that operating table. Things went from bad to worse on surgery day, starting when Hillary herself allegedly was allowed to prep her own IV bags, despite having no known medical training. I know, it's weird, right? Police say she also downed, quote, a handful of multicolored pills, which included Valium, end quote. And that during the procedures, which included lip injections and liposuction and scar revision, Hillary Brown started twitching and then seizing, and then she never woke up. And she died a week later. And the problem for Dr. Brown, one of many, is that he allegedly waited anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes to call 911, despite repeated requests to do so from his assistant. Last month, the state of Florida moved to, quote, restrict his medical license, claiming that he ran a sloppy and dangerous and dirty practice where staff would help themselves to drugs from the inventory to, quote unquote, take the edge off, and where women patients might have butt lifts, whether they asked for them or not, even in cases when they said no. The good doctor was finally arrested this week, but how much trouble is he actually in? For that, I turn to Sarah Azari. She's a criminal defense attorney and NewsNation legal analyst. First of all, help me out here. Second-degree felony homicide. Oh, boy. I get manslaughter by culpable negligence. I'm not sure I understand second degree. Am I off?
No, I'm with you, Ashleigh. It is not second-degree homicide because this case turns on intent and malice. And, I mean, there's nothing that meets that element here. Manslaughter, yes, because he could very well be criminally negligent in the way that he handled not only his wife but the other patients. But this is not, second-degree murder. And I think on the evidence side, it's going to also turn on pathology and toxicology. Was he responsible for her death? We know that she took these pills. He didn't know, apparently, what she had taken. He was asking his staff, what did she take? What did she take? So all of that is going to go to his mens rea, and I think that's where the prosecution's going to have a problem. They've overcharged this case.
What about the whole 10 to 20 minutes thing? I mean, the medical assistant says, we're asking, call 911, and he didn't, apparently, allegedly, for 10 to 20 minutes. How problematic is that?
It's problematic because he's not a layperson. He's a doctor, so he's held to a different standard. And so the standard, according to the board complaint, is that he should have immediately escalated the aid at that point and the condition that she was in. Instead, though, look, first when I heard about this, Ashleigh, I thought he's twiddling his thumb and thinking of his life, his own life, and not his wife. But then when I read that complaint, it's apparent that he was making an effort to save her. He was asking for an oximeter. He was asking for oxygen tanks. He was, eventually, he told them to call 911, but he was giving CPR. So he was taking steps. And that's why, I can't see this as anything. I mean, I hate to say this, but it could just be a tort. It could be medical malpractice, wrongful death. But at best, it's manslaughter.
So what about the part that, I was reading a whole bunch of complaints from the staff that the place was filthy dirty, that they were doing all sorts of procedures they shouldn't have been doing because the doctor allegedly just told the staff to go ahead and do it when they weren't trained for it, that she herself was part staff and was prepping her own IV bags and was doing other things in the practice. So all of those things, that to me sounds pretty darn negligent, actually sounds reckless to me. Is that going to factor into this case against him?
It does, but if you think about it, that the wife is the victim here. The wife is the one that died, so that's why this is a homicide. And I, as a defense attorney, I would say, look, he didn't target his wife. There's no intent here. He was just equal opportunity negligent, and so in a way, I think bringing in that context is going to help him in this case because it's really about the death of his wife. And I have to say this too, Ashleigh, I've represented a lot of doctors and medical professionals over the course of my career, and this just looks to me like he was a substance abuser. He had easy access to narcotics and he spiraled. There were a lot of statements by his staff that said that suddenly the practice took a turn. Everything was dirty. People were involved that were not medically trained. And he himself was like screaming for help, And so I think that this is unfortunately one of those situations where I think the defense attorney needs to put him in a facility to get the help that he needs because it definitely looks like that to me.
Well, it is bizarre. And what a beautiful woman, too. I keep looking at what's wrong with her. She shouldn't have gotten anything done. She's so darn pretty. Sarah Azari, thank you. Good to see you. Appreciate it.
Good to see you.
There's that picture. She's just lovely. Oh, it's heartbreaking. Okay, so coming up next, we've all seen the bloodshot mugshot. But now what? Like, what happens next? Justin Timberlake joins the list of celebrities in big trouble after his DUI arrest in the swanky Long Island village of Sag Harbor. But what happens to the rules and to police protocol when a perp also happens to be a superstar among a community of megastars? Is there a celebrity culture, and will Justin get a pass? Or is it possible he'll be treated worse than the rest of us would be treated? That's next.
Mary, Janet, hey.
Eddie, no, Fraser, Frank. Frank?
Fred, how are you? Fred.
Fuel up to 7 brain health indicators, including your memory. Join the Nariva Brain Health Challenge.
If you're not familiar with Sag Harbor, way out near the tip of Long Island, a couple things stand out. It is tiny, fewer than like 3,000 people. It is absolutely jam-packed with celebrities. Super rich people. It's also got some non-celebrities, but there's, again, super rich people. And the police force there is also tiny, but it is quite savvy. Sag Harbor is where police say Justin Timberlake decided to drive his BMW under the influence early yesterday morning, and a celebrity mugshot was born. There you go. This'll get legs. So far, everything has seemingly been by the book. But is the Sag Harbor book the same as the Casper, Wyoming book, or the South Bend, Indiana book, or Name Your American Town? Will Justin Timberlake be pampered, or will Justin Timberlake be pilloried? And in the age of body cams and dash cams and TMZ, do authorities really have any wiggle room at all anymore? Wiggle room is music to my next guest's ears. Mark Eiglarsh is a criminal defense attorney and a former county prosecutor with more than 32 years on both sides of DUI cases. First, I just want to get your reaction, Mark, to this arrest and this mugshot.
Well, I just want to remind everybody that he enjoys the presumption of innocence like everybody else. That mugshot means nothing to me. He has, red, glassy eyes like anybody at nighttime. That doesn't show me how much he had to drink. So let's wait. Let's see what the evidence shows. There are merely assumptions being made by an officer. Let's see, is there body cam footage that corroborates it? Is there dash cam footage? Is there a busload of nuns who saw him falling down drunk? Let's wait and see what the evidence shows.
Okay, I love that you said the busload of nuns. Not only is it funny, but I also often wonder if you need a busload of nuns when you have someone who is as absolutely beloved as Justin Timberlake, or is it all going to happen behind the scenes? The defense will all happen out of the view of the rest of us. He probably won't even make a public appearance back in the Sag Harbor courtroom. Like, how's it going to work?
Well, first of all, I hope he's not treated any differently than any first-time DWI offender in New York. That means that if we look at the definition of justice, Aristotle defined justice as like cases being treated alike. He should be treated just like anyone else, which means if they've got the goods on him, then prosecute him. But if they don't, do not hesitate to either reduce the charge or drop the case outright. Don't do it. Don't be afraid of the Ashleigh Banfields who are going to cry that he was treated differently.
Oh, but here's what I think, and this might surprise you and maybe my viewers.
Yes.
I think when a celebrity gets treated equally, it's actually unequal, because you and I, we could come to work the next day and no one's going to know that we got a DUI. Timberlake could lose endorsement deals. He might lose a concert or two. He could lose hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. And then he's got the humility, the shame that comes along with it that Joe Blow doesn't get because it isn't publicized. And I don't know whether that ever factors into whether police go ahead and charge or say, oh, geez, if I do that, he's going to get 10 times the punishment than any average guy.
It shouldn't. Why should that matter? What matters is how he drove, how he exited the vehicle, how he performed on the field side sobriety exercises, not tests. They call them tests. There's nothing scientific about them. Whether he blew into the machine or not, and what's his reason for refusing. Those are the issues. Who he is, how well he sings, his celebrity, has nothing to do with the evidence of the case.
So tell me about we just heard that he refused to take a breathalyzer. He also said, allegedly, I had one martini. all those things. If this is your client, what are you doing with that? Are you suggesting, look, take the hit, don't do the breathalyzer, you'll probably lose your license automatically for a year or so. But what do you recommend to your clients?
First of all, I don't know whether he's guilty or not. I'd demand all the evidence. I'm entitled to see everything. It's not, they don't hide the 8 ball. You're allowed to see what the evidence is. First of all, we're relying upon solely the officer's word. If that's it, well, then there's a lot to talk to him about. Like, my client allegedly didn't have slurred speech. Isn't that correct, officer? You wrote down he had slowed speech. What the heck is that? Slowed speech? And by the way, what about all the other things he didn't do? There's no evidence that he was falling to the ground, that he had opened a container, that he vomited, all the unusual indicia of impairment that's not necessary to convict someone, but things that would tell me that he absolutely is guilty. And by the way, many innocent people refuse to blow into the machine because it is fallible. It's like a toaster that you set on light and sometimes it comes out burnt. A lot of people refuse to blow for reasons other than being impaired.
That is such an interesting analogy. It's like a toaster that you put on light and sometimes comes out burnt. I knew you'd come up with some good stuff. Thank you, Mark Eiglar. It's good to see you.
Let me tell you something, Ashleigh. I will say to you, it's possible that he's telling the truth, and he did only have 1 martini. Just remember that, okay?
I want to know.
Friend.
I want to go out with you. Thank you, Mark. I was totally not expecting that, but you have now made my night. We'll have you back early and often. Okay, still to come. How much do we really need to know about a uniquely horrible crime? How much do we really need to see? A line has just been drawn in the sand in the triple murder case that may send Chad Daybell to death row. And guess what? You're not going to believe what I'm about to say, but I think I'm with the Idaho judge on this one. Stories next. We do not do gulag justice in America. It's not secret in this country, right? That said, the judge who just presided over Chad Daybell's trial for triple murder has now sealed almost 100 exhibits permanently, as in forever. They include photos of human remains that were found on Chad's property and autopsy pictures of the victims. You'll remember those victims: Tammy, his first wife; J.J. Vallow, Tylee Ryan, the children of his second wife, Lori Vallow. Judge says the pictures are in high demand by bloggers and YouTubers who, quote, have a vested interest in monetizing the tragedy. And the judge says, no go. And this time I agree. There you go.